Breaking news. Is coming in to the Situation Room. The Republican National Committee and the Georgia GOP are now suing to challenge absentee ballots that voters try to turn in by hand instead of through the mail in some counties. CNN political correspondent Sarah Murray is working this part of the story for us. What are we learning, Sarah?
Well, Wolf, I think this is part of the Republican litigation strategy to try to challenge batches of ballots in states that they think are going to be very close, very hotly contested. And of course, Georgia is on this list. So what we are seeing from this new lawsuit filed in federal court is a Republican National Committee and the Georgia GOP challenging ballots, absentee ballots that are being delivered by hand by voters to election offices over the weekend. And what's interesting is they're challenging these ballots in 7 counties that are Democratic leaning. Now, there are Republican leaning counties in the state of Georgia who are offering this same service this weekend that are not named in the lawsuit. Republicans have also already tried to make this argument in a different court, the Fulton County Superior Court, saying that Fulton County should not be accepting these hand-delivered absentee ballots this weekend. That was a challenge a judge heard yesterday morning, and the judge found that it was allowed under the law for voters to show up to return their absentee ballots by hand in the same way that a mail carrier can drop off these absentee ballots over the weekend. So we will see if Republicans have any more luck trying to take this case to federal court. I think it's a little bit of a long shot, though, Wolf.
Key news just
now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole. That's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it.
There you have it. Donald Trump saying again, reiterating, there will be a bloodbath, threatening violence, and so much more. This morning, we got the wonderful, knowledgeable, great Lauren Burke with us this morning, Black Virginia News. Before we get into all of that, Lauren, sad news to start off with this morning. The legendary, great Quincy Jones has died at the age of 91 years old. He died in Los Angeles yesterday. His publicist confirmed, but did not say a cause of death. But we know that Quincy's career, many people think about Quincy Jones, they think about Michael Jackson's biggest hits, Thriller, Off the Wall, Bad, but his career extends far even beyond that, Lauren. What a great career. Quincy Jones has died at the age of 91. And I can't hear Lauren.
Yeah, I guess.
Going in and out. There you go.
Yeah. Thanks. An amazing career. He started when he was 14 or 15 years old with Bumps Blackwell. The only reason I know who Bumps Blackwell is because I'm a big Sam Cooke fan. And one of the orchestras that played along with Sam Cooke is Bumps Blackwell's orchestra. And then, of course, he also orchestrated for Frank Sinatra and I believe Count Basie. So he's got this entire career that happens before Michael Jackson. Leslie Gore is somebody else he worked with. And of course, the diversity of people that he worked with is incredible. It really is incredible. It goes into 7 decades of work, which is unheard of in the music business because most people can't survive the genre changes. And I really think Michael Jackson and Frank Sinatra are the only 2 people I can think of, and of course, Quincy Jones, who survived all the genre changes in their career and sort of have these 6 and 7. You know, it's just amazing the length of the career of Quincy Jones.
Yeah. If you probably don't know this, I didn't know this for a long time. That D in his middle name, Quincy D. Jones. Mm-hmm. You know what his middle name is? Delight.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I did not know that until recently.
Yeah,
this was something with The Weeknd, and somehow that came up when he was working with The Weeknd, and I had to look it up. I remember a couple of years ago, I'm like, Delight. His name is Delight.
Yeah, there's a lot of fun Quincy Jones facts. Somebody gave me a Quincy Jones book when I was in high school. A book had come out about his life. You know, I guess, I mean, you could have like 3 or 4 Quincy Jones books coming out, but I found out that he was such good friends with Frank Sinatra that the signet pinky ring that Sinatra has on his finger that you can see in a lot of photos, he actually ended up with that after Sinatra's death, and you can see
Wow.
Jones wearing it. I mean, it's like insane,
Okay.
you know. But to me, you know, two of my favorite musicians are Ray Charles and Sinatra, and he, of course, has this connection to Ray Charles and Sinatra. It's crazy. It is crazy.
Without question, he was raised primarily by his father, who was a carpenter. His mother, and the reason being, his mother was had a schizophrenic disorder.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They moved to Seattle when he was very, very young, but nothing stood in this man's way, stood between this man and greatness. He broke barriers. We don't often hear much about the barriers he broke. It was so much. I mean, we saw that clip there. We Are the World. It was Quincy Jones who brought all of those megastars together in the mid 1980s and said, "Look, everybody, check your ego at the door. We're going to do this." That was the whole USA for Africa situation. And I mean, he got everyone together on that "We Are the World" song and album, and raised millions and millions of dollars. The song, of course, the primary song co-written by Lionel Richie and Michael Jackson, but Quincy Jones was the architect behind all of that. And George Benson, George Benson's career. George will probably be the first to tell you that he would have no career without Quincy Jones. This guy has done so much. Of course, younger generations might remember it was the guy behind the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Right. Yeah, he was behind Fresh Prince, and there was another thing that he was. I mean, of course, several movies. In the Heat of the Night, he did
Yeah,
the
he
soundtrack for
scored
Heat of
that.
the Night, which was a really good soundtrack. I also love the fact that, you know, he has 7 kids, and I don't know what his namesake does, Quincy Jones the third. He's probably
Yes,
into music. I don't know. He's in his mid-50s, but it is kind of fun that you know, there's a lot of people around who will help celebrate his legacy. You know what I mean? It is an amazing career, probably an unheard of. I can't think of anybody else. I mean, we have to get into like Mozart and
right.
people like that to really compare him to anything, because the length of the career, and Beethoven and Mozart didn't live that long, you know. So compared to the length of time people live now. But just the little scene from We Are the World, you know, We Are the World documentary just came out not that long ago, a few months ago
Right.
on Netflix. And there's some really cool scenes in there. You know, the whole Bob Dylan moment where they try to get Bob Dylan to relax in the studio. And I remember at the time when that came out, we were sort of like, wow, this is sort of an odd part, because Bob Dylan doesn't have the traditional singing voice as everybody
Right.
else, like the other types of singers that you have there that are like pure melodic singers. He's a folk singer, and the stuff works perfectly for him that he writes for himself. But to have him do something else is another thing. And they get him to do it. And it's because Quincy Jones and Stevie Wonder work with him through the part, and it happens, and it sounds good. It sounds
Oh,
good.
it's probably one of the more memorable parts too. Bob Dylan's part. I mean, my
Yeah.
gosh, his
Yep.
voice is so different
Right.
from Michael and Lionel and the rest of them. I mean, the
Yep.
voice really stands out. Cyndi Lauper, so many on that song that and then you get Bob Dylan. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah, but somehow he made it work with all those
He made it
different
work.
styles. You know, I think Springsteen was just finishing a tour, Born in the USA tour, which was a rigorous tour. And I think he had to fly from like Buffalo to California to be at that session. And then, you know, his voice is not one that you drop in. I mean, these people are different types of singers, so many different
Mhm.
types of singers. It's not like they're all going to sound like Whitney or Mahalia Jackson and it just fits in. But you have to build a line for that. You have to build lines of music for those different voices. And Lionel Richie and Quincy Jones and Michael Jackson and Stevie Wonder figured out a way to do that. It's incredible. It's crazy. It really is.
It's funny you mentioned like Springsteen coming off the Born in the USA tour. Those shows were 4.5 hours long
Right,
every single night. So
right,
that was amazing
right.
to have
And
him.
he's he's on another level in terms of his the whole thing of performing that long. He also has a thing, Springsteen has a thing of not doing the same set list twice.
Exactly.
And so that's got to be hard, although it's not hard if you've got a bunch of great songs, but still You've got, it's not like you're just getting up there every night and doing the exact same thing. Yeah, Greer reminds us that The Wiz is the other thing that Quincy did. It's like hard to
Yes.
remember all the stuff. The Wiz was
Sanford
very
and Son.
yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it really is amazing to have a 7-decade career that starts at age 14 and 15 when you have to sneak into bars and clubs underage to play. Several people did that, and Quincy Jones was one of them. During the jazz era, you kind of do it because, hey, you know, you slip somebody some money, you do it. But, you know, it is an amazing career, and he's a player, he's a composer, he's a songwriter, and he's just a thinker all in one. I can't think of anybody else in the modern era that fits all of those descriptions.
Yeah, David Youngblood said he was the penultimate artist, and Oren G says a young Quincy Jones meeting a young Ray Charles sticks out to him. And Southbound 3000 says, "Is it okay to say Q did it his way?" I think so. I think there's no question about it. Quincy Jones, wow, what a career! What a career! What a life! 91 years old, long life to considering. 91 years old. Wow.
Yeah,
Amazing.
he's pretty active almost to the end. Because I think
Yeah,
we saw him, I think, at the Oscars maybe 3 years ago. He was on stage at the Oscars. So it's amazing. It really is. He didn't check out in the last 10 years or anything like that. He's been doing stuff. So it's an incredible thing.
exactly. Well, Lauren, a federal grand jury on Friday, after we went off the air, of course, convicted former Kentucky police detective, a former Kentucky police detective of using excessive force on Breonna Taylor during that botched 2020 drug raid that left her dead. 12-member jury returned a late night verdict after clearing Brett Hankinson earlier in the evening on a charge that he used excessive force on Breonna's neighbors. But it was the first conviction of a Louisville police officer who was involved in the deadly raid. Assistant General Attorney General Kristen Clark said Breonna Taylor's life mattered. She says, "We hope the jury's verdict recognizing this violation of Taylor's civil and constitutional rights brings some small measure of comfort to her family and loved ones who have suffered so deeply from the tragic events of March 2020. So finally, some justice for Breonna Taylor."
Some, but yeah, that was remains an outrageous case. One of the more outrageous cases in terms of police brutality, effectively going to the wrong location, a conspiracy involving law enforcement planning what they were going to say when they messed up, shooting and killing the wrong person who had committed absolutely no crime whatsoever, getting a big attitude when there's a second party there who, of course, draws his firearm because people are breaking through the door. Really a great example of why no-knock warrants are problematic in a huge way. And I think increasingly, and I say this as a child of law enforcement and as an aunt of law enforcement, as a girlfriend of law enforcement, because my boyfriend is a U.S. Capitol Police officer and has been for over 20 years. You know, law enforcement now is starting to get a little bit too into people's lives. I mean, it's not like this is a new thing I'm saying. This is really Captain Obvious, but it needs to be said. A lot of this stuff, stop and frisk, and these special patrol units, these anti-crime units where everybody's plain clothes. This happens in New York all the time. These guys are walking up plain clothes and the people don't know if they're cops. And then there's some sort of altercation and, oh shoot, you've assaulted a police officer because you didn't know he was a cop. That's all instigated by the system. That is not somebody dialing 911 and saying, "Come help me." That is the law enforcement agency deciding that we're going to enter the scene. And this is to me, this Breonna Taylor murder is a great example of way over proactive policing in terms of, you know, a warrant being issued or warrant service or whatever that is that they were trying to do should not be this complicated. And it
And there
was
you see that.
end up killing somebody who should be alive today. There's nothing worse than that.
Yeah, and Greer put up that headline there, and we've been hearing this constantly on the Trump campaign. He wants to give police even broader powers. He wants to embolden them to do even more. And wow, it's to see stuff like this with Breonna Taylor all these years fighting her family fighting for justice, fighting for some measure of justice, because of rogue police officers and what they did, um, to her and so many others. And he wants to give them even further immunity from prosecution. So we'll get into more on Trump in a moment. But the FBI, Lauren, is investigating the death of a Black man in Alabama who was found hanging in an abandoned house following a request from a local sheriff. While there are certain talk among the community, whose members include law enforcement, but they accuse law enforcement officers of unchecked misconduct, as we are just talking about. But the sheriff's deputies found Denoris Richardson, who is 39 years old, in Colbert County, somewhere miles from his home, in a city called Sheffield, which has about 10,000 people and sits near the Tennessee River. But the family says this was a lynching. He did not commit suicide, and the department now is investigating it, that there's a possibility that this is a homicide.
Yeah, and didn't he have some sort of problem, connection, argument, dispute with law enforcement shortly before this happened? What an
Before
amazing,
that, yep.
yeah, what an amazing coincidence. Gee, I wonder why the family thinks there might be a connection. And
Yeah, and no
so,
suicide note.
yeah, no suicide note. The guy is young, and does he have, were those his kids in the photo? Do we know
Those are his
that?
kids. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's unusual and a big red flag when somebody commits suicide and they have kids, because usually that's the thing that stops people from committing suicide. They don't want to do it to their kids. At any rate, yeah, obviously that should be investigated. We're getting this type of case, by the way. It seems like we get one every 6 months, some suspicious death in a location in the United States known for suspicious deaths throughout history of Black men, right? So, and if you're going to commit suicide, I'm not sure why you're going to a barn or some remote location to do that. You can do that any place. That in itself, the location itself of his death is suspicious. So hopefully Kristen Clark will still be on the job next year, or can get it done beforehand if in fact the vice president is not successful tomorrow or this week, because these are the cases that you can bet that the Republicans will never look into, because of course racism doesn't exist according to John Roberts and so many others, right? So this is obviously very suspicious. And again, this type of case comes up, somebody missing. I know Ben Crump is working on one of those cases. Hopefully he'll get involved in this one, but it definitely should be looked into.
Yeah. This is a terrible situation. You mentioned the lawsuit. Her husband, the wife here, his wife, mentioned too that her husband had filed a lawsuit, and it was against local police back in February, and he had coached little kids in baseball and football, and police, after the lawsuit, as Orange G mentions, they attacked him. He alleged that he was assaulted, denied medical attention, and pepper sprayed with tear gas and shot with a taser while they held him in jail. Files a lawsuit, and as you articulated, he allegedly goes to some abandoned place somewhere off near the Tennessee River and goes into this barn and hangs himself. It just doesn't pass the smell test.
Yeah, this is brought to you by the same region of the country that claimed that Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney had killed themselves, right? I mean, they'll say anything. I mean, they'll literally say anything, no matter how people disappear or what time it is or how suspicious it looks. Their go-to is always that the person killed themselves. The person shot themselves 3 times in the back of the head. Like that's what we're supposed to somehow believe. And without the Justice Department getting involved, you would never know what happened. And typically, because of the cameras all over the place in some of these jurisdictions in the North, I don't know that the South has bought into this whole police camera thing yet. Maybe license plate cameras, maybe that type of thing. But one of the few good things, even though I think it's a Fourth Amendment violation in most cases, and the lawsuits are flying right now in Virginia in particular. One of the good things about cameras is that they pick up everything. And of course, the bad news is who's watching the camera to raise their hand at that moment and say, hey, we saw this. But this is a moment where, it sounds like the definition of a literal lynching, but of course it does have to be investigated.
Yeah. Wow. And you mentioned too again about the election. Look, we know that what Project 2025 is all about, what whatever Agenda 47 is about, and it says pretty simple. Under a Trump Vance administration, they will investigate racism against white men, not black folks, and they will dismantle the Civil Rights Division, among other things that this Project 2025 will bring. So, and speaking of Trump, the latest, Lauren, he wouldn't mind reporters being shot.
Yeah, well, that's not new. I mean, he's threatened reporters before. There's nothing new about this. The thing that needs to happen is everybody needs to report that and stop acting like, oh, it's just another day at a rally. Uh, the double standard with regard to Donald Trump is unbelievable, because obviously if Vice President Harris said that, it would be the end of days, right?
Right.
Joe Biden uttered something about garbage last week and everybody flips out on Fox News. I mean, it's just sort of not even, but Fox News, again, is a political organization masquerading as a media outfit. I'm not sure why people aren't referring to them as what they are, a political organization.
Right.
I have no problem saying that MSNBC is sort of the same thing. The difference is that Fox lies on a daily basis, and that's how they lost the Dominion voting machines case, but to the tune of $787 million, because they were lying and they were in close connection with Trump White House, where we have a so-called anchor on Fox News texting the president, or actually texting the president's people, because the president doesn't text. But we found out in court records that Sean Hannity was texting the folks in the White House. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, it's just they're not even trying to really pretend anymore. You want to talk about FCC violations, but at any rate, Donald Trump is dangerous. Donald Trump is absolutely dangerous. And there's nothing more dangerous than him getting power and consolidating it, which is exactly what Project 2025 is outlining. Consolidation of executive power is what that entire document is about, effectively making him into a king or an emperor or something like that. And so that's what they're after, complete control, and using the police to be the arm and authority of their orders. That's why he's always saying that the police and the military are his biggest buddies and all that, because they would be the arm of his enforcement. But what this is, the last gasp of white supremacy. That's what we're watching with Donald Trump's effort. And we have people like Charlie Kirk around and Steve Bannon. It is absolutely confirmed. What happened in Madison Square Garden, it's been confirmed before, but they're reconfirming it in a way that's really incredible in terms of the public piece.
Yeah, and we have, as Greer was showing too, we already have them using the courts already, in an effort to ensure an election steal, or if not a victory, but a steal. Trump certainly has the Supreme Court in his back pocket, pretty much, and they're gearing up for this battle. And Trump, again, as we heard at the top, look, there's going to be violence. It's going to be chaos if, in fact, the vice president does win.
We'll see. I mean, it comes down to margins and certifications. Clearly, he's going to do what he's always done, which is lie to himself and lie to everybody else about who won. Remember that we didn't have any so-called election integrity problem until Donald Trump showed up and lost by almost 3 million votes to Hillary Clinton in 2016. Then suddenly there was an election integrity problem. And of course, that problem grew when he lost by a bigger margin to Joe Biden in 2020, almost 8 million votes. There's nothing indicating from a historic standpoint that he's going to win the popular vote, even with the fact that we have a Black woman running. But it's kind of I don't want to put an asterisk on it, but if we didn't know who Vice President Harris was and she walked through the door, it would take us a few minutes to probably figure out that she's Black or Southeast Asian or anything else. She could be Black and white. She could be Southeast Asian and white. She could be a lot of things, because we live in a diverse country that's always been a melting pot. The number of interracial marriages now is skyrocketing through the roof because the younger generation doesn't really care, and so the older generation did, and it was illegal in some places like Virginia and in the South to have an interracial marriage. But my point is, it just so happens that the vice president is very cosmopolitan looking and very diverse looking. And there's something there for everybody. You know what I mean? It really is. And so in Southeast Asia too, and Asians, and that whole group is growing, particularly in Virginia. And that's a not talked about enough group that is gaining political power. So when you put all that together, I mean, it's not like she looks like Esther Roll sitting there. She is somebody who I think in particular, sort of communicates to everybody in a very friendly way. She has a great sense of humor. She has a personality that is a huge contrast to Donald Trump. You're talking about a guy that's negative all the time, talking the country, talking the country down, saying negative things about the United States, obviously saying negative things about immigrants specifically from Mexico. But of course, he put Venezuela in there. He put the Congo in there. He put Haiti in there as well, because he's a hater. He's a negative hater. And that contrast, I think, is what's going to get her over the line tomorrow, because I think people are just tired of it. Like the white dude said on their call at one point, one of them just said, I'm just tired of the whole thing. Like, this is just wearing me out. And he's right. I mean, there's a certain element of being worn out by Donald Trump.
Yeah, Mike Lee mentions too that the National Guard is on standby in Washington, Nevada, and Oregon. I know here in D.C., Muriel Bowser says that the National Guard is on standby as well.
Really?
Yeah, so it's the NPD is working with the federal authorities as well. There's been a lot of planning going underway for tomorrow evening and beyond. And so folks are preparing themselves. And it's good to know, Lauren, that they are preparing for this type of violence if it indeed does occur, that they are prepared for it.
Well, I hope they're prepared for it on a legal footing. I don't know who's in charge, who ultimately is in charge of the Democrat strategy. I assume it's Mark Elias, because his law firm had always been the law firm of the Democratic Party. Then he broke off and did his own law firm. So it was Perkins Coie, and now it's Elias, whatever the name is of his firm. I assume he's the person. But they are going to need an army of attorneys to argue with these people who are going to say, should she win? I actually think if she wins by a large enough margin in places like Georgia or North Carolina, you can't really get away with it. But remembering that North Carolina has a Democratic governor, so it's a little bit easier. Georgia has a Republican governor. But he does, Brian Kemp has kind of showed a reluctance to go along with the craziness, as has his Republican deputies who are in charge of elections. However, they did change all their election laws so that you can get people who claim that, today is Tuesday and not Monday, and up is down and down is up. So they just want to see what they want to see, which the result being, Donald Trump winning. So there is going to be some major legal battles. They'll be along the lines of the batshit crazy Steve Bannon strategy, which is just say it, just say it, just say it, just say you won, just say you won, just say you won. That is what they're going to do. We know that sitting here right now, that is what happens should he lose. Of course, if
So too, Lauren, that he's already scheduled a press conference for tomorrow night to declare victory.
Yeah, well, he's going to do that no matter what the numbers are. We know that because that's what he's always done. I mean, that's what's always happened. I love JD Vance's nonsense during the debate. Well, there was a peaceful transfer of power. No, actually, JD, there was a violent attack on the United States Capitol. And my boyfriend and his friends had to be in federal court and get called by the FBI over and over again to testify because of your supporters, because of Trump supporters violently attacking the United States Capitol on the day and the hour of Joe Biden's certification. That's what happened. And they are going to try to do that again unless somebody tries to stop them. See, I actually think that compared to what happened before, there's a lot of people who are prepared for this moment. Mm-hmm. And I think Democrats now are on a different footing than they were certainly in January of 2021. And that footing is not in the mood for putting up with nonsense. So I do think that the attitude is different on Team Blue.
Mm. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. as Trump continues to ramp up this violent rhetoric. Org says that it is at least 30 election deniers serving as election officials at state and local levels across the country. We know that to be true. The drop boxes might be mentioned blowing up early. I've talked to some postal workers who said that when it comes to election related mail, they guard guard that like it's it's like Fort Knox. Even if it's one piece of mail that's election related, they are really serious about that piece of mail more than anything ever because of the volatile situation. So everybody is really on guard in one way or another. And Lauren, 76 million people have already voted as of yesterday. 76 million. Um, what is that a reflection of? And who might that benefit, if anybody?
It's hard to tell. It's probably a reflection of the fact that the Republican Party finally embraced early voting. They finally embraced early voting because they had, of course, been against it from the beginning and against drop boxes and all this other stuff. And now suddenly they're coming around. That's probably half, a little less than half of the total vote. You're going to have another 70 million to 80 million people vote tomorrow. I know a lot of people who like to vote on election day. I'm not sure why they like to do that. I do think there is a certain excitement to voting on election day. But there's also a certain danger in voting on election day, because if they tell you, like they could in Virginia, because we had a vote purge 3 weeks to the election by Governor Glenn Youngkin and his Attorney General Jason Miyares and his Commissioner of Elections Susan Beals, you could conceivably come to the polls and find out that your name is not there. Now in Virginia, you can cast a provisional ballot on the day of election. So there is no reason for anybody to be turned away in Virginia from the polling place without casting a ballot. At least a provisional one if your name, say, was not on the list. So in Virginia, I know my mother voted the first day of early voting. For a lot of people like my mom, this is a huge, huge symbolic deal. I dare say, not just for Black women. I've met a ton of white women in Virginia. There's a group in Virginia called Network Nova that's been around for a little bit of time, at least 6 or 7 years. And it's a bunch of white ladies, typically up in Nova, Northern Virginia. And they're very excited about Vice President Harris. They're out there. And it's so for women, this is a big deal. This is the first election since the Dobbs decision, since Sam Alito decided that he wanted to strike abortion rights. And even though I got to say it's not a huge issue on my list, it still goes to individual rights, individual freedom, and the state and the government getting involved in people's private business. And some of these commercials we're seeing, the Black woman in Texas, that commercial is hard hitting. And that's a Harris Walls commercial. And then we have a white woman who died the other day who was 19, also in Texas, that ProPublica discussed in a story that broke, I think it was on Thursday, because they're waiting for people to get on death's door to treat them. It's complete craziness, complete nonsense. And that it may be, in fact, I'm sure you probably saw, Stacy, the Selzer poll that came out for Iowa. Ann Selzer is a respected pollster. She's finding in that poll that Harris is winning by 2% in Iowa, a very white state, as I think we all know, because older white women are voting for Harris. So if that's true, and Selzer has an unbelievable track record of accuracy, that would be game, set, match. Because if older white women have decided, and that's a really reliable, older voters, Black, white, or whatever, they show up. They show up and vote.
Right.
Put that together with young people who just registered, and there was a spike in young people registering in late July of 2024, right after Biden left the race. That would spell trouble for Donald Trump, it would seem to me. But of course, it comes down to those specific states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania.
Now, Lauren, NBC News has said that they will grant Donald Trump at least 2 minutes of airtime because of Kamala Harris's appearance on Saturday Night Live. The FCC has determined that they owe him equal time. And so they've offered Trump some time over the next day or two to get equal time. I wasn't aware that a variety program would count. But then I'm also taken back to 2016, which was really what put Trump over the top when it came to his race with Hillary Clinton. And that was that he was constantly on the airwaves on all of the networks, and I did not see other candidates offered that type of time. What do you make of this? The fact that the FCC has, or at least NBC says that they want to comply with the FCC to give Trump this equal time based on the vice president's Saturday Night Live appearance.
I'm actually completely confused. I haven't had the time to study this. I know that it is happening, but I was under the impression that the equal time rule had ended under Reagan. So right away, my reaction was that the equal time rule had ended. So I'm confused as to why the FCC is evoking anything. If that's the case, then that would mean that every time she makes an appearance on something, the other candidate has to be there, and vice versa. Of course, we're at the end of the race, so for this race, that would be not in effect. I suspect that this is a federal. Obviously, FCC is federal, so
Yeah.
if this is a federal rule, that would of course apply to Tim Kaine's appearance on Saturday Night Live. He was on. He's running against a Republican named Hung Cao. I'm not sure why that hasn't come up, but I'm completely confused because I thought the equal time rule had ended several decades ago. In fact, 6 decades ago. So I'm not understanding what that FCC commissioner is talking about. So I have to go and educate myself on what what he's talking about, because I just don't know how this is now relevant and how this is now being brought up. There's been many political cameos on Saturday Night Live, and now all of a sudden we're hearing about the
100%.
so I don't get it. I don't get
Is
it.
it NBC? Could this be a case of NBC just kowtowing to Trump?
They probably are, because it's just easier to do that. But I have to say, because it is before the election, he could conceivably get into office in January and punish them, which is, I think, why the Washington Post punked out of an editorial, because they're afraid of Donald Trump. So at any rate, as Al Sharpton says, if you're scared, say you're scared. It's not that difficult to throw him on the air on the Today Show or something like that. But if
Right.
their argument is that was some sort of a political commercial or some sort of thing, that's interesting, because that means that all the interviews he's doing on Fox and all these other places, then she has to show up. I mean, like, I'm completely baffled, because I didn't think the equal time rule existed anymore. So I got to check that.
And speaking of Al Sharpton, he did give I thought it was a great one-liner on Morning Joe. He says Donald Trump brought a lounge act to politics and don't know how to play on the big stage. That was fantastic.
Yeah, and not only that, this is probably one of the worst closing weeks of any presidential campaign. Of course, if he wins, it's an affirmation of the closing week. I'm a believer that he's going to lose, because the history tells us that the American people is not interested in this type of candidate. We saw that with David Duke, specifically in Virginia. We've seen a few candidates, E.W. Jackson and Corey Stewart, who liked Confederate battle flags, and everybody rejected that. We did have a race in 2017. Ed Gillespie ran an incredibly racist campaign against Mexican immigrants, trying to brand Ralph Northam, who of course won that race, as a member of MS-13, which was particularly absurd because Ralph Northam is a doctor and went to VMI. I mean, but the point is that that sort of racist, open racism has been rejected. It is scary to watch 80 million people vote for it, or 70 million people vote for it, has happened in 2020. But still, you do realize at some point, a lot of people have to just vote straight party, no matter what the person is saying. And then they start to try to justify the crazy stuff. But I think that Trump is so crazy and so dangerous that even, when you see these groups of Republicans showing up, standing behind Kamala Harris and stuff like that, that's unprecedented. That doesn't happen. You don't get Republicans standing behind a Democrat for president and saying, hey, I've had enough of this. And we've seen that. We've seen that now with a lot of people. I never thought we would see it with Stuart Stevens, for example. I never thought I would see Stuart Stevens every day on Twitter saying, and yes, it's called Twitter and not X, saying that, this is crazy. This is craziness. So that's been interesting to watch. It really has.
Speaking of Twitter, it's funny because since Elon Musk is his shenanigans and his weirdness and craziness and absurdness, Donald Trump's failing Truth Social is now valued more than Twitter. And so
That's
it's amazing what happens when you go in that den of vipers, and eventually you get bit. Some cobra is going to get you. Greer says that Trump has been breaking laws back to back. She says it's crazy, Lauren, and we are now seeing a lot of women dying from miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies in places like Georgia and Texas. She believes that this will drive the vote.
Yeah, I think it will too. This moment is brought to us by, I'm never going to let it go. It's brought to us by Hillary Clinton and Robbie Mook. And even though I do believe that Hillary Clinton was treated terribly during that 2016 race, that was a total double standard. Interestingly enough, when I look at, and part of this is probably just because we had a truncated 105-day presidential race for Vice President Harris, it was only 105 days. But the level of misogyny directed at Hillary Clinton was a lot more than what I've seen directed at Vice President Harris. Some of that is just the Democrats waking up to it and fighting hard against it, and groups like Win with Black Women. And some of it is just that, Hillary Clinton's campaign wasn't that great. And what you ended up with is losing, okay? And you lose because Robbie Mook doesn't want to give out lawn signs and wants to pay his digital friends that have iPads. And I'll never forget my mother going to the local Suffolk Dems office in 2016 and not being able to get a lawn sign. And then I'm driving through Isle of Wight County, Virginia, and I see these gigantic Trump signs on these gigantic lawns in Virginia. And those are stupid things when you make mistakes like that. And to bring it to, what we're seeing now, what that led to, of course, was 3 Supreme Court picks for Donald Trump, which led to the end of Roe v. Wade and people dying, to Greer's point, people literally dying because of public policy, because of stupid, insular public policy. And when I'm debating anybody about abortion, what I always first ask them is, why is this your business? Why is it your business what a couple is doing, what a woman is doing with regards to the decision around whether or not she is going to give birth? Why is that your business? And I can never get a good answer. And I'm never getting a good answer as to why it's the government's business. And you can see the clumsy and stupid application of this thing, right? People are dying because we're waiting to see how bad it is and whether or not the pregnancy is really viable. That is all craziness brought to us by Samuel Alito and his 5 friends on the Supreme Court. And it points to why it's so vital that the Democrats get hold of the Supreme Court. Because now we're starting to see decisions now that are purely political. That Virginia decision they just made in favor of the purge is a political decision. It's a legislative decision based on no legal anything that anybody, because of course they put no legal writing on it. They just we're going to overrule the Fourth Circuit, and then they don't detail why they're overruling the Fourth Circuit, because of course there is no legal argument that you can make. The argument that Alito wrote for the majority against Roe was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous legal argument because he just doesn't like abortion. So they have become openly political at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I want to get to 2 things, one from Orange G and one from Mike V. I think I'll go with Orange G first because I'll save Mike V's for perhaps last. He says Sexy Red voted for Kamala Harris. She said she voted for Kamala Harris, and Snoop Dogg called Trump out this weekend. He says, I am shocked. But the question really is, Lauren, I saw Cardi B represent the vice president. She gave this speech in which people criticized her because she read the speech basically from her cell phone. But when we see all of these Springsteen, Stevie Wonder, Tyler Perry, all of these celebrities, Samuel Jackson, do they make a difference?
Yeah, I think they actually do make a difference. When people have 20 and 30 and 40 million people on one social media account. So, for example, King James, LeBron James, not only tweeting out a video, but a message of what the hell are we doing here? I think that people who may be apolitical, but like basketball, are going to look at that. They're going to pay more attention than they would have if he didn't do it. And when you have that many people, just one account, just his Twitter account, I think has 50 million. I didn't even go look to see what he did on Instagram or anything else. He probably did the same thing. I do think that it makes a difference. I don't see how it doesn't make a difference. And when you're talking about these megastars that are on these levels that are unprecedented, there's only about 5 or 6 entertainers that can say that they've got over 30 million. It's Beyonce. I'm not really considering LeBron James an entertainer in the same sense as a singer, but of course, sports is effectively entertainment as well. But LeBron James and Beyonce are into the stratosphere with the
Right.
number of views and the amount of attention that they can get with the communication. So I do think it makes a difference. At the baseline, it increases awareness about what the general thinking is with regard to the cool kids in high school, the LeBron Jameses and Cardi B and Beyonce. What are the cool kids thinking? And so that I do think matters.
Yeah, and you know those folks who criticize Cardi B for reading off her cell phone. Come on, and with a platform like that, and a message that she had to deliver, I'm pretty sure she was nervous. But if you listen to her, those were her words. These were not somebody saying you should say this. These were her words. She talked about her kids, and she was, you know, she kept it as real or as true to herself as possible. I find her to be very fascinating. I don't listen to her music. Don't really know her music, but I've always found her when she speaks to be a very interesting and very entertaining person. It goes back to some years ago when I saw her in that carpool karaoke, and I thought, this individual, this Cardi B, has a career well outside of music. She is extremely entertaining, if you ask me. That's my Cardi B pitch for this morning.
Well, Cardi B and Usher and J Lo are also supporting, as you know, all supporting Vice President Harris. And it was interesting to watch J Lo talk about the irritation that she felt after the racist statements at the Trump rally at Madison Square Garden directed to Puerto Ricans. But none of them, of course, are professional speakers, but of course, they're in the same realm of being somebody who can stand on a stage in front of hundreds of thousands of people and present, right? So they're able to do that really well. But it's interesting to hear in detail the specific thing that an entertainer says. And I think the most interesting ones so far have been Cardi B and Bruce Springsteen and
Oh,
Usher
yes.
and J Lo, because they're not. And I will say I'll put Eminem in there as well. They are definitely locked in on some personal rights issues and, you know, around the abortion thing without sometimes saying it bluntly. You can tell that's what they're talking about. In Springsteen's case, he did say it pretty bluntly. But at any rate, they're talking about personal liberty and personal decision making. And of course, when you've had careers like this where you're dealing with so many people and you're famous and you got people, you know, in the cases, I'm sure, of Springsteen and particularly Usher, you have people soliciting you for sex and all that. I mean, you're having to deal with a lot of different elements in life. And I'm sure that, you know, for them, it probably is a big decision in the background. I'm sure they have their managers and stuff saying to them, do you really want to get involved in politics? Do you really want to say something? You know, your career is going fine. And I know Springsteen is obviously toward the end of his career. You can argue that J-Lo is as well. She's in her 50s, although she looks like she's in her 30s. But the point of it is, I'm sure all of their management said to them, and Springsteen, of course, was involved, I think, in 2016 with
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton. So
Yeah,
he's
he
been
was.
involved in politics for a while. But I'm sure their management is saying to them, why do you need to get involved in this? Usher is on a tour and has a residency in Las Vegas. You can bet that people have said to him, you might lose money if you come out publicly and say something in this race. And then you might get attacked by the next president if in fact he gets, and they are completely ignoring that to get involved. And I actually think that's a really, really interesting part of that whole moment of all these celebrities coming out for Harris.
Yeah, RG says Trump goes nuts when he sees Beyonce and Taylor Swift. He turns from orange to red. He literally does. You know, we did that whole Beyonce video, and I mean, it's just he does loses his absolute mind. But Mike V says to you, Lauren, he's asking you. He says there were 2 more Black male voter summits this weekend. He says I do. He's asking, do you still think that Black men voting GOP is a nothing burger this election cycle?
It's a huge, huge, gigantic, massive nothing burger. It is a media creation. It is the media going out and finding the one guy, the 2 guys, or whoever the heck they can find that'll say that they hate the vice president and that they're voting for Donald Trump. And the overwhelming majority of Black men are voting for the Democratic Party. That has been the case for decades. And somehow the media, the New York Times, somehow can't find any of these people. I run into them every day of my life, but somehow the New York Times can't find one of them. But they'll build an entire piece around negative energy and negative statements that a Black male is making against a Black woman, which is what this is really about. It's also about the fact that these newsrooms are too lily white and have too few people who will raise their hand in the editorial meeting and tell all the white people, all their white bosses, you're wrong. Most Black people are going to be voting for the Democrat, and that would be the vice president. You would never know that from the media coverage, particularly coming out of the New York Times, which I'm familiar because one of my family homes is in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights, and I'm telling you that these liberals, these progressives, they love to drive this narrative against Black men, none of which they know, by the way. They quote no Black males from watching Law and Order and watching sports. So they don't know any Black men. If you asked any of them, these people I dealt with the Washington Post during the Justin Fairfax thing, who are from Alexandria, upper Northwest DC, Chevy Chase, and McLean, Virginia. And I'm giving specific locations because that's where the editors live that I was dealing with. None of them know anybody Black that would be in their house on a social occasion at dinner. Okay. If I said to them, have you had a Black person in your residence, a Black male in your residence for social reasons in the last year? I suspect the answer would have been no. They don't know what they're talking about. They don't know who they're talking about. And this is tomfoolery. So that's the problem. They don't have Black men who are the Black men that they're talking about. The working class Black male with a family and a house and a picket fence, to me, does not exist at the New York Times enough or the Washington Post. They have people who are subsets of subset groups that don't represent the majority of Black men in the United States. That's who they hire. And so I'm tired of this narrative. It's going to be disproven tomorrow once again, just as it was disproven 4 years ago. It is ridiculous.
And it is a total myth in the press to say that the brothers are not with me, because they are.
For sure.
Right. That's right.
Yes, we are.
Right? By the way,
and it is.
Brothers are with me.
You have to understand who's writing these stories. It's white people who went to Harvard and Yale. They're in spaces their entire young life with not a lot of Black men around, right? So if you went to some Ivy League school and you went to some private school in Connecticut or in the East Coast, there's not a whole lot of Black men around. Then they get to a newsroom. Their entire life is going to school and being in a newsroom. And that's all they know. Members of the media are terrible when it comes to knowing what they're talking about in these constituencies that they have no relationship with. But in the Black community, I don't know who they're talking about. I really don't.
Well,
and this was one of the dumbest narratives, by the way, one of the dumbest and most incorrect narratives of the 2024 campaign. It was.
He says, Lauren, he knows who they're talking to. He says they find those Black guys at the corner store. He says, he's seen the posters hanging around those hood stores. He says, and those Black men don't vote. And Austin says, as far as those editors you're talking about, well, Black people drive down their streets. That's it.
Well, I'll tell you what, if they think they know anything about over 20 million people in the country, which is what this is. Black men are over 20 million people. It's like 25 million people. And you come down to some guy standing on the street corner. They don't do that with white folks when they interview them. They don't go to some white person standing on the street corner random. No, they go to somebody who's probably an academic, somebody educated. They don't do the equivalent in our community. And they think who represents our community is typically lower middle class or somebody in some, urban area. That's their stereotypical view of who Black people are. So that's who you keep seeing in these pieces. But it is the biggest nonsense in the world, and we're going to see it. We're going to see it tomorrow in the exit polling.
Yeah, and we'll probably see Lauren. We always see her with Roland Martin. We probably see her for election night with Roland. We're going to be with Roland on election night. We're going to drop in on Roland Martin, all the great work he's been doing throughout this campaign. Folks, if you're going to watch anything, don't watch mainstream media. Don't watch anybody else's coverage. Watch Roland Martin Unfiltered on election night. He is going to bring all of the goods, and Greer and I are going to be out on Black Lives Matter Plaza to check out the great Roland Martin and his coverage. Can't say enough about what he has done for Black media media in general. And we give him hats off all the time because he deserves it. He is the hardest working Black man in the business, and we appreciate him. And we're gonna be watching tomorrow night. We're gonna be there in person with Roland. I'm sure Lauren's gonna be there, and she's gonna give him her insights on what's happening specifically in Virginia, and also check out Black Virginia News. If you haven't subscribed to Lauren's newsletter, make sure you do, and get the best coverage in all of Virginia from none other than Lauren Burke. But check her out also on Roland Unfiltered, and we'll be checking him out as well. Everybody, thanks so much for joining us. And Lauren, we appreciate you as always. See you real soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for watching. Let it be known.
See you soon.